Hey everyone, welcome back to 8-Bit Hindsight, and today our topic is going to be realism in video games and how that relates to gameplay. Which is more important? How do they interact with each other? So I think we should just kick it off and get started. Nate, why don't you take it away?
If you think about the base idea of like gameplay, we think of the most pure versions of that being stuff like Pong or that kind of like maybe shmups, that kind of thing. So when you evolve from that over the years, and then video games are becoming more and more realistic, like how does that impact how you play a game? Like for instance, the game Red Dead Redemption 2, I like that game, but it takes a long time riding your horse, or when you're, hunting and you skin something, like it takes a lot of animation to do that in the game, in the open world game. So I personally think that while it's a good game, that kind of hurts the pacing. I do think that there are examples where realism goes a little too far and it kind of hurts the gameplay.
So
Um,
that's kind of interesting. So with the Red Dead Redemption problem, we'll call it, do you think it should be just like a time skip so that as much time passes in game as it would actually take to skin something? Or do you think it should just be a short animation? Don't worry about like that kind of minutia and detail and just move on with the experience.
Depends on the game, but like I think let's look at another open world game like Elden Ring that came out recently. Like when you call your horse, you instantly get on the horse, so it doesn't really affect the pacing and the gameplay. I'm personally kind of more of a fan of that, because I like pure gameplay. So yeah, to me, I think sometimes realism can get in the way, but I'm sure there are examples, especially amongst shooters and things like that, where realism actually enhances the game. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting seeing how games are evolving to become more realistic, and how we're kind of seeing some either problems from that, or I guess sometimes versions where realism enhances the game in some way.
Um,
Yeah,
I,
so oh, go ahead, John.
I really think it's a personal opinion type thing usually. Like let's say skinning a rabbit that you shot on Red Dead 2. Say you go down to skin it and you didn't notice that a wolf was over there also running to attack the rabbit, and so it's attacking you instead because it aggroed onto you. Well, you have to take that time to do the animation now, and you should have checked the area before you just went and skinned your animal. Some people might like the fact that that is an element of play in there, creating a little bit of extra realism to where you can check your surroundings and stuff before you take the time to do your thing.
Well, how realistic is that really though? Like if I'm skinning a rabbit in the woods, I'm going to stop if a wolf attacks me. I'm going to deal with the threat. Like I'm not just going to keep skinning the rabbit and being like, "Hey, hang on there, wolf. Hold on."
Most animations, they're either too quick to really bother. You might get hit once. Like a wolf isn't going to announce that it's coming for you. It's going to be ambushing you, and so you're not going to be immediately ready to attack it either way. In real life, it could just be a spontaneous thing. And a lot of animations, a lot of games that have animations like that, you're able to stop them.
So I think I fall more on Nathan's side of this. The realism needs to complement the gameplay because I mean if you really think about it, like and we can get into like let's say let me use an example of graphics, right? So throughout like all the time I've been playing games, I've heard so many times, oh, we have super realistic, hyper realistic graphics, and that was really big, especially back in like, oh, I don't know, the late 2000s into like mid 2000s, like everyone was,
Yeah.
or 2010s, everyone was like, oh, we have these really super hyper realistic, and it's like, yeah, ish. But now you look back at those same games and they're almost unplayable because they're so horrendous looking. Because it's like it meets that threshold, right? So that thing where it's like something can look, vaguely like a human, and you're fine with it. It can be kind of almost cartoony, and it's fine. But when you get too close to being realistic, but not realistic, it just becomes this weird distorted reality, and then it becomes uncomfortable to look at.
Do you have any examples of that?
Oh man,
A good example in horror, for instance, is like this is kind of old, but there's two games that I really like, and it's obviously Silent Hill, particularly Silent Hill 2, and Siren. Like those games, have you guys played those games?
Silent Hill 2, yes. Siren, no.
The people look so strangely real, especially in relation to this world. Like the people look kind of hyper real, especially for its time period, and it makes everything look even creepier. You know, like I don't know if you guys seen Siren, but it literally looks like they Photoshop people's faces on the character models, and it makes things look like really uncanny, like surreal almost, and it really adds to the horror element. And it's because it uses, I guess, quote unquote, realism in its presentation in a really effective way. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting seeing how this idea of realism can kind of affect, I guess, the presentation in a video game. But one thing is like when we say realism, what do we mean exactly? Like, do we mean the graphics, or do we mean the way something feels, the freedom in a game if it's open world?
Yeah, I definitely think that does become the question, because there's different types of realism, right? There's realism of function, there's realism of like the story, there's realism of like the mechanics. So I do think you need to narrow it down a little bit, but so let's talk realism of like mechanics, right? Escape from Tarkov. They model all of their weapons and stuff in the game to be based off of real things in real life. And the armor in the game is based to it's designed to stop the same rounds that same armor would stop in real life. And then of course like they add like, oh, the armor degrades over time like most armors would, all that other stuff. Their grenades are actually act like grenades instead of producing gigantic freaking fireballs and wild stuff. Like it's just like a puff of smoke and frag goes everywhere. When you get hit, your character actually acts like he got shot, not like in like Modern Warfare where it just sounds like you're taking like shots to like a padded pillow or something. And one shot could put you down from any weapon. It doesn't matter what it is. So I think in that game, the realism actually enhances it.
Why do you think it enhances it over something like Call of Duty?
For me, I think Killed can also back me up on this. I think the realism is kind of like it anchors you to reality, so you have the expectation of you don't want to get shot with anything, which heightens the stress level of that game, and that is what the game is trying to produce. It's trying to produce a super fun but also very stressful environment that you're putting yourself in, and you're not like a freaking tank taking 100 rounds to kill you. Nah, man, one bullet will do. One bullet placed in the right spot.
Yeah, the game is very adrenaline inducing. Like Rick said, one shot to the head and you're gone, no matter what gun that person had. It could be a little Makarov pistol, and you can die at any moment in that game. So when I first started playing it, it was definitely stressful. But now that I've played it for a while, it just every time I get into a really good firefight, it's just so adrenaline inducing. Where on Call of Duty, you respawn right after you die. Your only goal is just to go find somebody and shoot as many bullets into him and hope that he dies within 20 bullets.
Do you think it feels like actual war, like how you'd imagine war to be like?
I don't know. Like, so here's the issue with that. That is such a next level experience. I don't think there's any way that you could actually simulate that in a game or in a movie. There's always going to be a level of disconnect. However, the penalties in Tarkov, like Killed was saying, are immense for like losing the raid or dying in the raid, because you lose all the gear that you have. I mean, it's as close, I think, functionally to character death as you can get in a video game without making the game unplayable, right? Because if like everything just got wiped every single time your character died, it would be like an old game they had on the Xbox called Steel Battalion, where you were playing as a mech robot fighter and you had like a gigantic console. It had like 32 freaking switches and buttons everywhere. You had all these pedals and stuff that did different things. You never knew what the hell was going on. And if you didn't hit this one eject button whenever your mech was destroyed, you had like 2 seconds to hit it. If you didn't hit it, it completely wiped your game file. It didn't matter if you were on the last mission. It wiped your game file back to the beginning.
And, oh, wow, that's really strict.
Yeah, so when you're talking about, like, the stress you feel, like, it gets to the point where you're like, I'm never going to beat this game because you have to do it perfectly all the way through, or you at least have to hit that button. And even if you hit that button, that mech you had is gone. So all the money you spent upgrading it and getting new parts for it, it's gone. You have to build a new mech, and you can definitely run out of funds if you keep failing missions. So I think there's like a sweet spot somewhere in between that and, you know, some crazy unrealistic stuff like Modern Warfare or whatever.
So I guess like a lot of what realism in video games is like, it's kind of like flattening reality in a way where it complements the gameplay. I guess you can't really purely make a realistic game, right? Or otherwise it'll probably be really boring. You have to cut out the, you know, like if you're playing a character, you don't want to constantly look after when they need to go to the bathroom or when they need to eat and sleep. I guess some games do, but
well, I mean,
yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think you're right with the flattening of reality piece. I also think the actual feeling of it, right? Like, you're not going to actually feel what it feels like to get hit with a mortar round in a video game.
Right.
Like, it's just not going to happen. But I think, like, the mundane aspect that you were talking about, they do in video games, especially in, like, some VR games, are, like, you're doing something super mundane. Like, you're building a PC, or you're doing just these regular jobs. And that is a game in and of itself. And even in those, you're not like in there like screwing every single piece in because you're limited by your controller and obviously the game system that you're using. So I think in all instances you have to expect the flattening of reality, and I think that whatever you choose to make more realistic, like be it permadeath in a character if you lose them, like Fire Emblem or XCOM 2 or whatever, I think it needs to complement the gameplay and not just make the experience less fun.
Right. It has to, be incorporated into the gameplay. So if it's like if using the bathroom or drinking water or whatever, if that's part of the game, like you expect that that's going to be part of the game mechanic in some way. Do you guys have other examples of like games that incorporate reality really well?
There's quite a few survival games that do it. Like on 7 Days to Die, you have different types of water you can drink. Like normally you would find unclean water. It's in this brown bottle, and you have to go through different purification ways to get it to be clean so that you can drink it safely. If you're in a pinch, you can always just drink it and you'll be sick, but you won't be dehydrated anymore. It's just really cool. Like when you first start, the only thing you can do is boil it, and there's only a chance of it working. And then later on, when you advance higher, you can like use sanitation pills on the water and stuff, and it just makes all your water drinkable. It's really cool how they incorporated that into the game.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That sounds like a good use of reality to enhance the gameplay as opposed to detract from it.
Yeah, definitely. Are there games where you think realism detracts from a game?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the more fantastical the game, I think, in some sense, I suppose, the more fantastical, like, the game, then, you know, realism is already being set to the side, so it probably wouldn't enhance the gameplay to make it overly realistic. For instance, Final Fantasy, right? You have unlimited time, let's say Final Fantasy X, right? You have unlimited time to choose your moves, balance what you want to do, all that stuff. But then, like, X2, they put in like the timer that, like, between how often you can make a move and all that, so it made it like a more real-time aspect. And I just hated it. I disliked the system altogether. I think if you're gonna do something like that, either make it a full-on, like, hack and slash, kind of like you can use different moves in real time, or make it a turn-based thing. So I think when you try to like get in between two elements like that, I think that's where a lot of like just not great stuff happens.
Dude, JRPGs are pretty interesting because I remember back in the day, when Western RPGs and JRPGs were kind of like very split. I think that kind of it's a little more blurred now, but like with people used to say Western RPGs were more realistic because it's open world and you can walk around and travel. And JRPGs are really menu based. And it's kind of interesting because I remember at a certain point I was thinking to myself, like, how are JRPGs going to evolve? Because if they don't evolve, they're probably going to kind of be forgotten because it's too gamey. Like, there needs to be a little bit less of a menu-based kind of gameplay, at least for younger people or people who are just getting into video games who want constant action or constant, movement in their games. And like, it's kind of interesting seeing how especially some of the Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII Remake or Final Fantasy 15, like how they kind of incorporated real-time kind of fighting with kind of the menu-based gameplay and how they kind of fuse them together in a way that feels kind of balanced. I'm kind of impressed by the way they kind of advanced in that
You know,
way.
there's
Kind of make
another
it
game
more
that you and I
realistic.
both really enjoy, and it does the exact same thing, and that's Valkyria Chronicles. You start with your
Yeah,
third
yeah.
person selection menu, and then you have to real time move your character, aim, and shoot. And I think it does that in an amazing way. And maybe it's not super realistic, but again, I think when you get too focused on realism, it can hurt it.
It has like the right amount of control. Like
Yeah.
it's not so detached that you're just looking at menus or something, but because you can control characters, it does kind of add value in the sense that it feels more relatable because there is a bit of realism there.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, going from that third person to first person thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Uh,
definitely agree.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Another one that I really like is Resident Evil. Like to me, the first Resident Evil, especially the Resident Evil remake, it's I wouldn't say it's realistic, but to me it really feels like a pure game to me because you're mainly in one mansion and like every little corner of that mansion, you'll get to know it anyways as you play, and it feels like kind of like a board game almost, like you really know each room. You have to strategize in how you consume your resources, and also like you're going in and out of the same rooms usually, and you have to kind of strategize on how you get to one room to the next without, getting eaten by zombies. And I just think that's a really cool way of looking at a video game. And then when they came out with Resident Evil 2, they kind of upped the remake. They upped the realism, if you will. Like, for instance, the gore in that game looks really good, and the character models look really good. I guess it's more quote unquote realistic and the guns handle better. But it's just kind of interesting because the gaming aspect of the original is still there. Like you still have to be careful with your ammunition. You still have to make sure that you're traveling around this police station without, getting eaten by zombies. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting to see how kind of an old game is kind of updated to be quote unquote more realistic, at least in presentation.
Yeah, Resident Evil is one of those interesting games like that. And one of the more quote unquote realistic things about it that I liked is the fact that you kind of have to pick and choose what you carry. You don't have an unlimited inventory. You have to fit things in, and sometimes you have to make a choice between one thing and another.
Right. And I guess that's the flattening of reality in a sense, because I mean, in real life, you can't carry all that stuff, right? Like you're limited to what you can carry. So it's kind of like commenting on that aspect of reality, if you will.
Yeah. John, what do you think?
Resident Evil. I never played a Resident Evil game, but I think I think my stance on it is I prefer quite a bit of realism in my games, but there is a far too far side to it. Like take Arma 3, for example.
Okay, now that's a game I know you like. So is that the realism too far, or
It possibly too far. So I played in a mill sim with a whole bunch of mods, and there was this medical mod to where when you got shot, you obviously took a wound, and you have to go to the medic, and um, you have to based on your pulse, and you have to stop the bleeding. And if you bleed too much, you can go unconscious. Then you have to pump them with epinephrine to after you stop the bleeding to keep their heart going up. Or if their heart gets too much, you have to give them some morphine. If their heart stops, you can do CPR on them or hit them with the what's it called?
a defibrillator?
That defibrillator, get their heart going.
Oh my
And
god.
like the medic's job, which was normally my job because I had fun with it, was basically to go to a wounded guy, drag him out of the combat, and perform medical procedures on him in a video game. And I mean, I thought it was fun, but I know a lot of people that would think that'd be way too far onto the realism spectrum of a video game.
Yeah, you need a
Like,
freaking class on how to play that specific type of character.
Yeah, we basically took classes on every single thing we did in that game. Yeah.
oh, I guess it's if you have to manage too much, like in reality, I guess that's when it becomes a little too much, you think?
Yeah, I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
definitely one way that it could become too much is if like you just get unnecessarily bogged down because you have to remember what is the point of the game that you've made? Is it to teach realism because you can definitely use games for that. And
That's true, yeah.
if that's the premise of the game, then absolutely make it as realistic as possible. But if the game is meant to be fun, then you have to see where the line gets drawn between realism and just not fun anymore.
Do you think simulation and video games should be separated? Do you think they're in their own categories? Because simulation, like let's say you're doing a surgeon simulation, the point is to be as realistic as possible to help, let's say, wannabe surgeons. Do you think that that's a game?
I think it can be.
Yeah, I think it's still a game, but it's also should be labeled as a teaching tool.
Yeah,
Right,
I
right.
think that teaching simulator is a very important label to have because that tells the person that's about to engage with this product that, hey, this is not just meant for you to have fun, this is meant to teach you. And it may not always be a pleasant experience because you're going to have to think about 20 different things at once, and they're not necessarily fun things, but you're going to learn.
You know, I hear the drones, for instance, that they use in the military is like very game-like when you're, I guess, piloting it. But I mean, I've never really seen footage, so I can't tell like how gamey it is.
From what I
Did you
understand, you can just look up videos on piloting a drone.
for like warfare and stuff? Because I
Yeah,
remember
I've
reading,
never done it, so
yeah, it is kind of interesting wondering if that is flattening anything of reality, even though it's very much grounded in reality,
well,
in
I
that
imagine the
game.
piloting of a drone is just like piloting a drone that you would get in the civilian world, like because there's drones now that you can like put like a camera or they already come with a camera and it feeds to your phone and you have basically a controller in your hand, you're flying it around. I mean, so in that sense, but I mean, is it like piloting a actual aircraft? Probably not.
Right.
And I mean,
Kind of,
they have simulators that are built to replicate that. So in my mind, that's where you start getting into the this is not a game per se, it's a game, but it's meant as a teaching tool.
so do you think in games there has to be a fun element in order for it to be classified as a game?
Well, going back to Escape from Tarkov, there's no fun element. There is a
No fun
uh,
element? Why do you play it?
I'm just kidding. There is a fun element, but it's all part of that adrenaline rush, and like it's a shooter. So if you enjoy shooters, there's that fun element there. But the game was made to be a hardcore game with realistic elements where you go in, you kill other things, scavs, other players, you get loot. If you die, you lose it all.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I think like John's saying is that like there is definitely that element where it's a fun game, but it's fun because of how stressful it gets, and it manages that in sort of a fun way. So like there are elements of it that are kind of like in between the matches, like if you get out, you have to reorganize your entire inventory because if you're like me, you forget to do that beforehand, and then you're trying to stuff everything into everything else just so you can take all of your equipment out, and you're like, all right, I just spent more time reorganizing my inventory than I actually spent in game.
like this morning, I did I think 3 raids this morning, and the first two went very well. We got what we wanted to do inside of those raids, and then the third one we got killed by 2 extra campers, and then we had to go back to our menu, a little pissed off, because getting killed by extra campers is always a bad thing, and had to deal with it, and we stopped playing.
Yeah, there's definitely the element of like you will rage quit at some point in that game. No, it happens to everybody. Everyone I've ever known that plays Tarkov, that like there. In fact, there's some people I play with. I know what their level is, and like something will happen in game, like a specific firefight or something, and I'm like, all right, well, this person is about to get off, and then they'll be like, all right, I'm gonna go eat dinner. And it's like, dude, it's 4 o'clock. You're not going to eat dinner. You're just pissed off.
Do you think that realism detracts from the gameplay at all?
No, so that I think Tarkov has a well, in some ways it can because like managing your inventory, it's just a little annoying. But like I think the things that detract are not things that impact the game to where it's not fun. I think the game is still very fun. And part of the fun is like the challenge in it, right? So it's not just about, oh, I'm some super badass running around shooting like NPCs like crazy. No, the NPCs in that game will freaking kill you like
Like,
easily. But it's that more like sense of accomplishment that hey man, I know this is like the first level everyone goes to, but I still survived and it's still an accomplishment.
What games do you guys think are gamey? Just like pure gamey games?
Call of Duty.
Call of Duty is
Call of
very
Duty.
gamey.
Although I feel like, you know, I feel like a lot of people would consider that kind of more realistic, quote unquote.
I guess it depends on what sense, because like the gunplay and like mechanics of the game are absolutely not realistic.
No,
Right. Just the
not
skin of it, I guess.
Well,
yeah.
even the skin, like a lot of the guns in there are, unless you're playing one of the ones that's like old. I mean, actually, even then, because they allow moddable things to guns. So like you can mod guns in Tarkov, but you can only mod them with parts you could actually mod them with in real life. So like all the parts are actually based off of real life things. But in Call of Duty, you can make like just absolutely ridiculous guns, and like you can use them effectively. And it's like, dude, in real life, you would not be able to use that. You cannot use a pistol, rifle, bolt action effectively. Like, get out of here. Or they'll allow you to like add parts to a gun that has never had that part available to add to that gun. So you're just kind of making things up. Or like if you know anything about firearms, you'll start seeing like that's not how that gun functions in real life, and like it's like I guess they didn't put enough time and effort into researching the actual weapon to see how it works before they created the animation for it.
Yeah, that whole quick scoping aspect.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. I guess that's kind of unrealistic.
Or
Yeah,
chucking a
very
knife into
unrealistic.
the air and it coming down on the other side of a building and accurately killing someone. Like, no, that's
That would be very impressive, though.
that would be stupid. Just ridiculous. But also, you could chuck a grenade like fucking hundreds of meters, and it's like, dude, you'd be lucky. Like, grenades are heavy. You'd be lucky to chuck that thing like 50 meters if you're
How much
untrained.
do they weigh? Like an
Uh,
actual grenade? Because
Mac-
in video games, it makes it look like they like weigh like maybe a pound at most, you know?
Yeah, that's probably about right. They probably weigh about a pound, pound and a half. But they're also like in video games, you can just throw them and like they go super far. It's not like throwing a baseball, man. Like it is off weight. Like it's an irregular shape and it has different weights inside of it. So like it's not super conducive to throwing like a baseball, and that's why like you have to learn specific techniques to throw a grenade effectively, and it feels ridiculous when you do it, but I mean that's how you're taught and that's how you have to kind of do it. So
Another game that's really gamey but has kind of realistic presentations and a few places is the Yakuza series. Have you guys played that?
yeah, I've played I think Yakuza 3.
Yakuza 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, Yakuza 3. I think Yakuza 0 is a good place to start for those who haven't played it. But like that game is really gamey because it has like a really serious Yakuza like story usually, but like it's kind of like it's not open world, I would say, but you're like in kind of like a tiny downtown area of Tokyo, and you walk around it, and Tokyo looks really realistic. Like if you can go into convenience stores, and they look like real Japanese convenience stores. You can see like labels, like uh, on the like if you look at food products, there'll be labels on it and stuff. Like it looks really good. But then while you're walking, you'll encounter punks, and then it suddenly turns into a beat 'em up.
Yeah.
You can fish, and you can do like all these like really gamey things. So it's kind of
so
one of those games that I think is
so
yeah,
for
really good.
Yakuza they spend their realism on the world itself, and then the
Yeah.
gameplay is actually really gamey.
Right, right. Very, very gamey. And it
Okay.
knows really well how to switch between being in game mode, if you will, and being kind of serious with the presentation when it needs to be.
Interesting. So you asked what games I would consider very gamey. Any of the Dynasty Warriors, and then
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
any what you call it, like Street Fighter and stuff like that. You know.
Right, right. Like arcade games, I feel like
Yeah.
are like the root of the word gamey, like
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Anything that has that like arcadey style to it. But I
right.
mean, Dynasty Warriors, obviously, it's based off of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So, and John will talk for hours about that. But um, I think the fact that you're one dude walking in and just basically taking an entire army by yourself, kind of pretty gamey right there.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely gone to a battle and take came out with 3,000 kills plus before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think anything where your character is like so OP in that way, then that's definitely gamey.
Right. I mean, they're not. I mean, even though they're based on real characters, they're not presented like they're presented like anime characters, really.
Yeah,
Well,
for
they're
sure.
based off of r- real characters in literature. Like these people didn't
Yeah, yeah.
actually exist. So
No, yeah, no, they did. Well, I mean, I guess in terms of someone, Lubu did exist, but yeah, in terms of what were they like actually in history? I mean, no one knows.
yeah, they're very fantasized.
Right.
And I mean, it's all about that kind of style, right? Because they were supposed to be more than mortal men. So
Exactly. Yeah, they're like portrayed in that way.
yeah, they're basically gods, or demigods, however you really want to see it.
Right.
Dudes over there like tackling horses and stuff. Let's see. We've talked about realism and graphics, how that can be both interesting or off-putting. Gameplay is the same way. Is there anything that we haven't? Oh, um, what about sound design? Is there any?
Wow.
Yeah. Is there any like games that really stand out to you where like the sound is super realistic and it enhances that experience?
Uh, actually, the Civ 5 and Civ 6 Sid Meier's Civilization 5 and 6, they get their they tune your music to whichever civilization you're playing as. So if you're playing as, say, the Japanese, you're listening to super cool Japanese music the entire time you're playing them. Sounds like I'm in Japan. Yeah.
That's an interesting tie-in, honestly. Like that was not something I would have thought of. Um, when it comes to like audio realism, I tend to like think of more I guess like first person shooters and stuff. Like a lot of them never really get across to you how loud firearms are when you use them, or how loud an explosion in a game is, because like a real explosion would freaking deafen you for a minute. Like most times it doesn't matter, even if you just fire like a handgun next to you, if you're like at a range or something, that could be really really loud.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think a lot of games really get that across.
Well, I
No.
mean, it'll be hard to because that could definitely interfere with the gameplay, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
If
well
it's
yeah, no one wants their hearing damaged.
yeah, exactly. But I will say there are games where, you know, you fire a gun and they sound really wimpy, you know, and it does kind of detract from the immersion.
Yeah, I think the most egregious thing, and this is in movies and TV shows too, is like suppressors. They act like it makes the gun silent, and at like maybe a really low caliber, it makes it pretty quiet. But like when you're actually there and you're firing something like that, you still hear it. Like even if you were on the other side of a house, you would still probably hear it. Like it's still pretty loud, or it's not loud, but like the sound carries a lot more than like they show in a movie, you know, where it's like, oh, I'm creeping through the woods, or in a video game, you're like, oh, puke, and you know, you shoot someone who's like, 50 meters away, and like none of their buddies hear it or anything. Like if you're 50 meters away, you could still probably hear it, especially if it's the first shot. So
Right.
I think sound, I think, is something interesting. I don't know that I would really want much realism in sound.
Yeah,
Just
for sure.
I think now like directional sound, that they can do that really well, and there are some games that do that, but I think that's kind of one of those areas they haven't really touched yet.
You know, another thing is the feel of the game when you're controlling the characters. Like for instance, with Resident Evil 4, like I really like the shotgun in that game because it feels like there's a lot of impact when you shoot.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I'm sure it's not realistic, quote unquote, but it does kind of fit your how you'd imagine a shotgun would feel, you know, in game form. So
I thought
in
you
that
didn't
sense,
you and I go shoot shotguns one day?
yeah, yeah, a while ago. I remember we were in a creek, I think, and we
Yeah.
fired
Yeah,
it up.
so I mean, you remember how like that gun was like jumping, one shot can like jump that weapon back out of your hands. It's like it's pretty powerful.
Yeah,
And
really
then and
powerful.
the sound is like bam. So yeah, I think whenever games get across like how, like, because
That
there's definitely
feel.
some games where it's like you're just it's like there's no recoil on the weapon at all, and that's
Right.
not realistic.
I guess yeah, it depends on how you're incorporating realism in games. Like you know, the Dark Souls games and stuff, like I really like FromSoft games because the characters feel weighty, like they feel like heavy and they feel like they really you know, have some weight in that world.
Yeah.
And a lot of these Dark Souls clones, I guess, that's the one element they don't get right usually. It's like how things feel when you fight or move. Yeah, like a lot of them feel floaty and they don't feel like they're really grounded in that world. And yeah, that takes away from the immersion and realism, if you will, too.
You
Absolutely.
talking about like you're wearing a certain armor, so when you do a roll to get away, it's a little bit slower.
Yeah, but even swinging your sword, you feel like if it's a like heavy sword, you feel like it's heavy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah,
just
like the
there's
person's not unnaturally strong.
yeah.
Hmm.
Uh yeah, you just feel like you are connected to the character's body weight, if that makes sense.
No,
Yeah,
yeah, that
that
makes
makes sense.
perfect sense.
Yep.
So that I think is pretty interesting and kind of I guess a good example of I guess incorporating realism where it matters.
Yeah, another example like that, they did an inertia update, of course, on Tarkov. It's the only game I can ever talk about. Um, you're carrying like 50, 80 pounds on your back worth of gear, and they finally incorporated inertia, so now you can't just stop on a dime. like you kind of take an extra half a step to stop, things like that. And then you can't jiggle peek on other first person shooters. You can jiggle peek, look to the side, around a corner of a room, and then go back real quick. If you attempt that now in Tarkov, you're gonna die. And I think that's a really good realistic aspect.
Yeah,
Right,
for
yeah,
sure.
it definitely enhances, yeah, again, immersion. I think a lot of this is immersion, it seems.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, how the realism like helps immerse you in the actual game. And that brings me to, of course, one of the things I'm always going to mention, how realistic is the story?
To me, like, I guess my view is because it's a game, the gameplay comes first. So I'm not too big on game story, but I will say there are games where the game story really does matter, like Silent Hill 2, for instance.
Yeah,
I
it's
think that game would
how
be totally different without the story.
I think again, it's one of those balancing acts. How do you balance realism with the story you're telling? Cuz like
Right.
I'm always going to come back to Valkyria Chronicles cuz I love that game, but in
Yeah,
actually spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't played that game, I am about to ruin one of the big events in it. So just stop this, don't listen, go play the game, it's great, and then come back.
yeah, it
Um,
is amazing. Right.
but there's pretty much you're going through the game and you can lose side characters and stuff, but main characters you're never really allowed to kind of lose until one point in the game where um uh was it Welkin's little sister gets killed in one of the cutscenes, and she's like it's the realism of war, like people are going to die, and it's just such a gut punch when that happens, and you're like, oh man, and you're like, oh damn, dude. And then like you realize after the game ends, certain relationships your characters have with each other will never happen if certain characters die. So I do like that kind of aspect with the realism and death.
Yeah,
But
me too. Permadeath stuff. Yeah, definitely.
but it's also like it's not super realistic. Like it's meant to be more about the story and the gameplay and the strategy. But there are those like little realistic elements. Like realism is probably not everyone's coming through it, man. And it might be one of your favorite characters that doesn't make it.
Right. Yeah, that's it really effective too, for
Well
sure.
said.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also something similar in Red Dead 2, isn't there? Uh, I'm not gonna ruin that
Um,
one, but
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna ruin this, I guess, but I mean, yeah, with the main character, yeah, spoiler alert, like he dies, so you switch characters kind of towards the end of the game, I will say. Um, but I don't know if that's like permadeath, but I guess it's realistic in the sense, like what's interesting about Red Dead 2 is he dies from what was
tuberculosis.
it? Yeah, tuberculosis, which is really interesting, because you'd expect it would be like a gunfight since it's a Western game, but it does kind of convince you that you're playing a game that's set in a specific time where, tuberculosis, I'm pretty sure that can be cured now, but back in the day, it was running rampant and people were dying left and right from it. So it's kind of interesting seeing something historical like that that really did happen. So it does kind of add to the realism.
Yeah, I think it
But I would
adds to
say,
that like Western grit in the game.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely think it does.
And I think that's one of those things where you see what balancing the realism with, so balancing reality rather with the fictitious elements in the story actually enhances it, because you're like, oh man, I didn't expect that. And it's not like unexpected just to be unexpected. It's like, oh man, that makes sense, and they set that up from the beginning. Damn.
Yeah, it's like incorporating reality into the gameplay, but yeah, it's not just about reality. It's like there's a measured reality incorporated into to the play part of the game.
Yeah,
I guess is
I like
what
that. I
makes
like that phrase, measured reality. I think that's what you really need to have in any game to make it fun.
right. Yeah, I agree.
So I guess basically what we learned today is we want our games to be realistic.
Well, we want it to be balanced.
Yeah,
Oh, right,
balance
right, right.
fits with the gameplay, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think realism can enhance if it fits with the gameplay, and it can also detract if it's too realistic and not enough of the gameplay.
Right. Yeah, exactly.